Rum, treasure, and boundless freedom. We're used to this image, but it's a trap. The freest people on the planet voluntarily created a society with the most brutal and inescapable laws, laws so harsh that the Royal Navy would seem like a health resort. In a moment, we'll tell the story of a carpenter sentenced for a single gulp of rum to a punishment worse than death by his own shipmates, and you will understand why they had no other choice. Let's take the code of the most successful pirate of the Golden Age, Bartholomew Roberts. His articles consisted of 11 strict rules. One of them stated, extinguish all candles at 8 in the evening. Any drinking after this hour was punishable. So much for romance. We think of piracy as chaos, but it was a system, an incredibly elaborate and brutal one, built on 3 pillars: absolute law, iron routine, and ruthless democracy. A pirate ship was not an anarchist commune, but a Swiss watch floating in hell. Every gear, every sailor had to function perfectly according to the articles, or the entire fragile mechanism would instantly shatter. Men who fled from tyranny built a democracy where your vote could not only elect a captain, but also send your bunkmate to a certain death. And every pirate voluntarily signed this bloody social contract. It was like being a shareholder in a startup where you vote not only on the CEO, but also on firing a colleague by throwing him overboard. It was the most brutal social contract in history. The answer will change your perception of freedom forever. Let's start with its foundation, their constitution, written in blood. This code wasn't a set of recommendations, it was a contract. Each ship had its own, adopted by a common vote. By signing it, often literally with a cross marked in blood, you surrendered a part of your will for the sake of the common goal. Breaching the contract meant only one thing: you were no longer part of the crew. And outside the crew, in the middle of the ocean, you were a dead man. Hidden within this contract was a stunning fact: the world's first insurance system. In the articles of pirate John Phillips from 1723, it was clearly stated, lose your right arm in battle, you received 600 pieces of 8, your left 500. This was unheard of in any Royal Navy. The first and most important rule on many ships was that all disputes were to be settled on shore, no fighting on board. A single knife thrust in a cramped cabin could deprive the crew of a valuable fighter before boarding. The punishment for this wasn't flogging. It was marooning. Being left on a deserted island with a pistol and a single bullet. A choice without a choice, a slow death by starvation or a quick one by your own hand. This very fate, though not by a pirate's sentence, befell the sailor Alexander Selkirk, the prototype for Robinson Crusoe. His story is a real testament to the hell of solitude, which pirates used as the ultimate punishment. Imagine yourself in his place. You stand on the scorching sand. The boat with your former brothers disappears over the horizon. The weight of the pistol is heavy in your hand. This isn't just a punishment. It's your complete erasure from their world. They sail away to survive. You stay behind because you threaten their survival. The word marooning itself comes from the Spanish cimarrón, meaning wild or feral, a term used for runaway slaves. For pirates who were themselves fugitives from the system, to maroon a man meant condemning him to return to the very feral state they sought to escape on their ship. Another rule: no candles or gambling after 8 in the evening. This wasn't about a bedtime routine. An open flame on a wooden ship soaked in tar and gunpowder is suicide. And cards or dice were a direct path to quarrels, debts, and knife fights, which violated rule number 1. The code didn't just punish transgressions, it cut off their root causes. On Blackbeard's flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, tons of gunpowder were stored. A lit candle in the wrong place wasn't a fire risk. It was a guarantee of instantly turning the ship and its entire crew into flaming debris. The 8 o'clock curfew wasn't about discipline. It was a survival protocol. But even the strictest protocol couldn't eliminate hunger. The staple of their diet wasn't rum, but hardtack, rock-hard biscuits that could be stored for years. They had to be soaked in water or beer to avoid breaking one's teeth. These biscuits, also known as ship's bread, were jokingly called toothbreakers. The only source of fresh meat was often the weevils and maggots that infested them. Sailors called this clan bread, a kind of gallows humor that helped them accept that their dinner was moving. Veteran pirates advised eating in the dark so you couldn't see what you were consuming. When fresh ingredients were available, they prepared salmagundi, a monstrous mix of whatever was on hand: chopped turtle meat, anchovies, onions, olives, mangoes, boiled eggs, pieces of salted meat, all marinated in wine and oil and served cold. It sounds exotic, but in reality, it was a way to mask the taste and smell of spoiled food. A key ingredient was often smoked or salted herring. Its powerful, pungent flavor was the perfect camouflage, able to disguise the taste of rot in meat or mustiness in vegetables. This wasn't cuisine, it was chemical warfare against bacteria. Take a look in your refrigerator. Now, mentally remove everything except for stale bread, a jar of pickles, and a piece of old cheese. This is your diet for the next 3 months. The question isn't what you would eat first, but on which day you would be ready to steal food from your neighbor, knowing the punishment is flogging or death. This is no exaggeration. In 1721, the crew of pirate George Lowther was driven to such desperation that they chewed on leather belts in their own shoes. Your thought experiment was their daily reality. It was because of food that pirate ships had a dual power structure. The captain commanded in battle, but in times of peace, the quartermaster ran the ship. He distributed food, water, and plunder. He was the guarantor of fairness. If the crew felt they were being shortchanged, a mutiny was inevitable. The captain was the CEO, responsible for hostile takeovers. The quartermaster was the chief operating officer and the head of the union, all in one. He ensured that wages, that is, food and water, were distributed on time and equally because a mutiny over food was more feared than any storm. But even he couldn't create food from nothing, and food was the fuel for their hellish routine. A pirate didn't lie in a hammock sipping rum. He worked, non-stop, pumping out water that seeped through thousands of cracks in the hull, scraping barnacles and seaweed from the hull which slowed the ship, mending sails torn by the latest squall. A pirate ship isn't a vehicle. It's a patient in intensive care, connected to life support. The crew are the nurses who, 24/7, must pump out water, patch leaks, and clean the hull of its sores. If they stop, the patient dies. The crew was divided into 2 watches, working 4-hour shifts. This means you never got 8 consecutive hours of sleep. You slept in short bursts in cramped, damp quarters alongside 100 other exhausted men. No silence, no personal space. On Blackbeard's flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, the crew numbered up to 400 men. They lived in a space smaller than a modern tennis court. It was life in a constantly moving, creaking, and wet can of sardines. Danger was everywhere. If swabbing the deck is a 1 out of 10 on a danger scale, then pumping the bilge in a storm, risking being crushed by a loose barrel, is a 5, and working the masts during a hurricane, that's a 10. One wrong step, and you're flying into the icy water with no chance of rescue. Boarding an enemy ship on this scale is maybe an 8. A pirate's greatest enemy wasn't a soldier, but the ocean. Historians like Chris Lane have calculated that during the golden age of piracy, far more men died from disease, accidents, and shipwrecks than in combat. Battle was one of the safest days in a pirate's career. The irony was that the biggest risk wasn't finding an enemy, but being left alone with the ship itself. In the rare free hours, there was music, cards, and drink. But alcohol, combined with extreme fatigue and stress, inevitably led to the very quarrels the code forbade on pain of death. The circle was complete. Sometimes, to blow off steam, pirates would stage mock trials. They would judge each other for imaginary crimes, handing down absurd sentences. It was both entertainment and a grim rehearsal for the real tribunal that could await any of them the next day. This tribunal was based on a principle unthinkable to the world beyond the ship: direct democracy. In an age of absolute monarchies, a pirate ship was an island where the captain was elected by a popular vote, and he could be just as easily removed for cowardice or tyranny. Every crew member, from the cabin boy to the bosun, had an equal vote in key decisions: where to sail, whether to attack a vessel, how to divide the plunder. Historian Marcus Rediker writes that on many pirate ships, black crew members had equal voting rights and an equal share of the plunder. In a world where slavery thrived on land, this floating nation of outcasts practiced a level of racial equality unimaginable elsewhere. And it was this democracy that had to decide the fate of the carpenter who stole the rum. His fate wasn't decided by the captain. The entire crew gathered on deck. The quartermaster read the article of the code the carpenter had violated. Then he posed the question, guilty? And every single pirate had to speak. To raise a hand, a cutlass, or simply shout aye or nay. This was no secret ballot. Everything happened openly, in front of everyone. You had to look your shipmate in the eye, perhaps the man who saved your life yesterday, and pass sentence. It was democracy without anonymity, where you were accountable for every vote. Put yourself in the place of that carpenter's best friend. You fought shoulder to shoulder with him. You shared your last piece of hardtack. And now you stand on the deck. He looks at you, pleading. If you vote for punishment, you betray him. If you vote against it, you set a precedent. Tomorrow, someone else will steal. The order will collapse. In effect, every pirate at that moment faced a prisoner's dilemma. Betray your comrade, that is, cooperate with the system, and the system survives. Support your comrade, and the entire system could collapse, dooming you both. Their code was structured so that betraying a friend for the common good was the only rational choice, and the crew votes aye unanimously. The carpenter faces a flogging according to the law of Moses, 39 lashes with the cat o' nine tails. Each of its 9 cords was weighted with lead or tied in knots, designed not just to strike, but to tear the skin. In the unsanitary conditions of a ship, such a sentence was often a delayed death sentence via blood poisoning. They weren't punishing a man, they were punishing the very idea of disorder. But this order served one purpose, the plunder. Forget chests of gold and maps marked with an X. That's a 19th century fiction. 99% of pirate plunder wasn't coins. It was goods, textiles, sugar, spices, navigational instruments, weapons, and most importantly, medicine and food. Pirates were less robbers and more armed black market traders. One of the most valuable prizes for the pirate calico Jack Rackham was a ship loaded with cocoa beans. In 18th century Europe, cocoa was worth its weight in silver. They hunted not for glitter, but for market value. They were brutal but pragmatic businessmen. Pirates received no salary. They worked for a share. The system was remarkably fair. The captain and quartermaster received 2 shares each. Officers got 1.5. Everyone else got 1. No special privileges. This system was called no prey, no pay. It was the ultimate high-risk employment contract, the equivalent of stock options in a modern startup. But instead of stocks, you got a share of the loot. And instead of bankruptcy, you faced the gallows. Let's say a voyage was successful. Each man received his share, equivalent to several years' salary for an honest sailor. This money was almost instantly spent in port towns like Port Royal on drink and women. Pirates lived for the day. They never knew if they would have a tomorrow. The average career of a pirate during the Golden Age lasted only 2 to 3 years. The city of Port Royal in Jamaica was called the Sodom of the New World. It's estimated that 1 in every 4 buildings there was either a tavern or a brothel, an entire industry built to empty their pockets. Imagine you're a pirate. Your share is in your hands. You have 48 hours on shore before the next voyage. You can spend every last penny because life is short, or you can invest a portion in better weapons to improve your odds on the next voyage. The first choice is the mindset of an outlaw pirate with a price on his head. For him, there is no future. The second is the mindset of a privateer serving a state. He has a career. The pirates chose the first. They knew that attempting to retire, as Captain Kidd did, often ended not at a villa but on the gallows. This brutal reality comes down to 3 simple yet merciless laws of survival, to their protocol. First, order is more important than friendship because chaos on a ship kills faster than any bullet. Second, resources are more important than individuals because without food, water, and medicine, the entire crew will perish. And third, the collective will is more important than personal freedom because one selfish act can doom everyone. This protocol almost perfectly mirrors the principles of survival in any isolated extreme environment, be it a polar station or a spaceship. Isolation and mortal risk always give rise to the same rigid social laws. The pirates simply discovered them 300 years earlier. They were not romantics. They were fugitives from the unbearable conditions on merchant and naval ships. They created not an ideal society, but a functioning mechanism for survival. Their democracy was a tool of control, their cruelty a necessity, and their freedom just a brief respite between work, hunger, and fear. The so-called Golden Age of piracy was a flash lasting just 1 decade, roughly from 1716 to 1726, 10 years that burned so brightly they created myths that have lasted for 3 centuries. It was not an era, but a moment of desperation. So who were they really? Desperate men who built the only possible fair system in an unjust world? Or just brutal bandits who masked their greed with fine words about freedom? We want to know your opinion. Write just one word in the comments: system or bandits. The pirates themselves did not consider themselves bandits. They called their enterprise a war against all the world. Was it a war for justice or simply for plunder? That's for you to decide. System or bandits, we're waiting in the comments. They escaped from tyrants only to become tyrants unto themselves. Such was the price of their freedom. When Black Bart was killed in battle, his crew, loyal to their code, immediately threw their captain's body overboard so his enemies could not capture it and display it for public ridicule. Even in death, the code was paramount.